Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Blackness and Diversity in the Workplace panel brought to you by Kappa Pi Pre-Law Fraternity and Black Ivy Pre-Law Society. My name is Laura Holland. I am going to be a junior in the ILR school, and I am a proud member of both Black Ivy and Kappa. So I will now introduce our 5 amazing panelists. And first, we will start with Samantha Cammey. Sammy graduated from the ILR school in 2018 and worked as a legal analyst at Sixth Street Partners, an alternative investment firm, before going to law school. She's a rising 1L at Harvard Law School and has been interning at Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen, and Katz this summer as an SEO fellow. She's also the co-founder of Black Ivy Pre-Law Society. Next, Teresa Danso Donclough. Teresa currently works at Disability In, the leading nonprofit resource for business disability inclusion worldwide. Teresa serves as the manager of Next Gen initiatives at Disability In and leads a career development program for college students and recent graduates with disabilities. After graduating from the ILR program at Cornell University in 2015, Teresa started her career at Capital One, where she worked for 3 years in a variety of HR functions. Next, we have Asia Moore. Asia graduated in May of 2020 with a Bachelor of Science in Industrial and Labor Relations. She is a Kappa alum, having joined the Z Pledge class in fall of 2017. Currently, she works at Bloomberg LP on the financial products recruitment team in a joint human resources and finance role. She hopes to attend law school when the pandemic is over. Baron Williams. Baron is a 2019 graduate from the ILR school. In addition to Kappa, Baron was heavily involved in the mentorship group, Scholars Working Ambitiously to Graduate, SWAG, during undergrad. He is currently a litigation paralegal on secondment at a private credit fund, doing his best to fill Sammy's shoes. Lydia Anglin. Lydia, unfortunately, she'll be shortly, but I will still introduce her. Lydia is a former analyst at Goldman Sachs Bank, USA, and interned with the Obama administration. Lydia graduated from the Cornell University ILR School in 2018 and co-founded the Black Ivy Pre-Law Society in the spring of 2016. Lydia plans to pursue her JD MBA at the University of Pennsylvania and specialize in ESG matters impacting corporate social responsibility, sustainability, and reputational risk. So those are our 5 amazing panelists. And just so everybody knows, the webinar is being recorded and the panelists are not speaking on behalf of their companies or institutions. But since it is being recorded, it will be able to share this afterwards with everyone. Okay, so now we're going to get started with the questions. And first, we want to talk about our panelists' experiences regarding Cornell and race and diversity. So first, I'm going to target Baron and Asia. And as leaders in Kappa, Baron, you were president as a junior, and also Asia created the diversity and inclusion chair position. I want to ask both of you, how have you seen Kappa change as well as pre-professional organizations on campus? And why did you start the D&I position, Asia? And for Baron, how did you want to change Kappa in your role as president? So I'll first start with Baron.
Thank you. So I guess kind of going up to how I became president, or kind of where that motivation came, I think it's probably best to start what Kappa looked like when I joined campus on the fall of 2015. So at the info sessions and then throughout the Brotherhood, there were actually no active brothers at the time in Kappa, which I don't want to say unfortunately, but just becoming from a rural area, predominantly white, it wasn't even something that necessarily struck me right away. Kind of just the lack of representation across all the different communities on campus. So I think in terms of Kappa's evolution, from where it was and me kind of being one of the only active, Black members as a freshman, to seeing the increase in diversity, and also kind of more conversation around that subject was definitely something that I was very happy for, and something that, you know, I wanted to further as president. I definitely, you know, could have done more, but I think, you know, even afterward with the creation of the diversity and inclusion position that Asia can talk about, I think there was a change where instead of talking about representation as we have these holes to fill, diversity became something of one, yes, we need to make sure we're reaching to these communities, because it's not just white people that want to be lawyers, but additionally, how can we partner with organizations in these communities to make sure it's not just, you know, grow the number of, you know, future legal scholars at Cornell.
Asia? Thank you, Baron.
Yeah, so thank you, Laura. As you mentioned, I joined Kappa in fall of 2017. I was the only like Black person in my pledge class. It was only 9, so I mean, still not great, but also it was, you know, a small group of people. But I would say that during my time in Kappa, me personally, I don't come from money. Obviously, I'm not white. So, and I've been in predominantly white spaces my entire life. I don't identify with, you know, a lot of those characteristics or the characteristics of the people who were in the fraternity at the time. And that kind of made me feel other and kind of prohibited me from wanting to go to events just because Cappy can tend to be, you know, a little elitist. And at the time, you know, there were not as many restrictions on hazing and things like that. So, you know, we'd have to wear suits to every pledge class meeting. And I only had one suit at the time. Like I had never needed more than one, and wearing obviously a suit twice in 1 week, washing it, continuing doing that, it's not good. And that was something that was required at the time. I didn't think anything was wrong with it. I thought something was wrong with me. You know, why don't I have, you know, more than one suit? And it came to a point where I was like, I shouldn't be feeling that way. I should feel like I belong in the brotherhood, regardless of whether, you know, I have 5 suits or 1 suit or a million suits or whatever. And obviously suits are expensive. Everyone pretty much knows that. And I think I just kind of got fed up, I would say, just with what happened in Cappy and some of the things that were said and, you know, the actions of the brothers that I didn't always agree with. And especially during the recruitment process, I felt like there were so many barriers to entry, especially for Black women. I felt like, you know, we think about this word professionalism, and professionalism is founded on white ideology. It's, you know, when you think about professional people, you're probably thinking about a white male CEO in a suit or something like that. And I didn't want that to happen to anyone else. And not that I had, you know, the worst experience going through the recruitment process, but I wasn't completely comfortable. So I think I just kind of thought that enough was enough. And then I proposed a D&I chair. It went through. And then I became the position head. There's obviously a lot more work that needs to be done. You saw that even during, you know, my seat at that time on the e-board. And yeah, I am glad that Laura's taken over. She's done an amazing job so far, at least I've heard. And I hope that, you know, Cappy thinks more critically about what it means to include people, because diversity isn't where it stops. And you know, inclusion also isn't where it stops. It stops at justice. And until we can reach a place in society where we can say that everyone has an equitable stake in every claim, we're not doing the right work.
Well said. Thank you both, Asia and Baron. And also for our audience members, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit any, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So next, I wanted to ask Teresa some questions. So under LinkedIn profile, it says that you were born a disruptor. And how did you disrupt on the culture of Cornell's campus? And how do you continue to disrupt in the professional world?
Thanks, Laura. I think of disruption in a variety of ways. Mostly it comes from my identity as a Black disabled woman. We often think of diversity, we think of race, we think of gender, we think of LGBTQ status, so we often forget about disability, which affects 1 in 5 people in this country and 1 billion people worldwide. And so we're not a small population, but it's often forgotten about, mostly because many disabilities can't be seen. like the one that I had. And so I often kind of have to be that person who's bringing up disability in the diversity conversation, and people with multiple marginalized identities, bring that up in conversations. And so that's something that I did as a student at Cornell, both through all the student clubs I was part of, but also in CUDA, which is the Cornell Union for Disabilities Awareness, that I was the president of on campus. Just bringing up the conversation so people are aware of it, but also aware of the resources that Cornell provides for people with mental illness, people with disabilities, making sure that they know the pathways for accommodations, for making sure they have everything in the classroom and also outside of the classroom as well. And in the professional landscape, I've taken that to the same level where I work. So at Kappa One, where I started my career, I made sure to have what we call employee resource groups or business resource groups, where they're sort of the student clubs of companies, if you will, and being able to be in charge of the Black and disability groups separately, kind of going back and forth between my both identities, allowed me to be able to find not only community in the company, but also being able to find people who are willing to change the status quo and how we think about diversity in general. So not willing to be silent about it anymore, and making sure that people are consciously aware of how accessible meetings are, how inclusive they're being. Not only is the diversity in the room, but who can come to the table and if that table is accessible in the first place. So just be like constant reminder of all the ways that diversity intersects with our identities, and intersectability at the forefront as well.
Great, thank you, Teresa. And welcome, Lydia. We're so happy to see you and have you on this call. And now for Lydia and Sammy, I wanted to ask about why you wanted to find and create Black Ivy Pre-Law Society, because a lot of pre-professional organizations at Cornell do have a bad reputation for having discriminatory practices and recruitment. So I want to ask, why did you start the organization, and what did you want your members to gain from being a part of that org?
I can maybe start first, and then Lydia can jump in. And it's been really great hearing like Baron and Asia and Teresa, and hearing all your perspectives. And very similar to Baron and Asia, coming into Cornell the fall of 2014, I knew I was interested in pursuing a career in law, but I didn't see a lot of people like me who also had that interest in the upperclassmen, and how to sort of navigate that. And that became even more prevalent during my summer internship, my sophomore year at Verizon. It was a cohort, about 5 of us in my HR internship program, and I was the only one that didn't receive the internship through either knowing someone who worked in a senior suite position at Verizon or lived in the headquarters where Verizon is located. And of course, I felt a lot of imposter syndrome, and felt, how am I possibly getting this sort of opportunity? Like, my parents are first generation. I moved to Maine. No one really leaves Maine to go pursue graduate opportunities in other states. And so we created Black Ivy because we wanted to create that sort of connection and interaction for people of color who want to pursue a career in the law. A lot of professional degrees, especially careers in law, about the relationships that you make, whether they be in your family or elsewhere. And we want to establish that with students at Cornell through touch points at law schools, at law firms, and then also providing LSAT prep resources.
Yeah, so I'll echo everything Sammy said. And additionally, Cornell is so rich in resources. So anyone who's gone there, they have the dollars, and they quite frankly have the alumni, but there's a disconnect when it came to advising, particularly pre-law students of color. So when I went to the ILR Career Services Department to talk to an advisor about going to law school, at the time, to be quite frank, my freshman year GPA was not competitive. And the advisor told me, like, if your stats are like this, you cannot get into law school, period. And I was very disenchanted when I heard that, especially because I later learned there were upperclassmen who had that GPA, who did get into law school, but had higher LSAT scores. So being aware of the rules that apply with being a person of color, also tapping in to our resources, something that we realized was a gap. And then also the sense of building a community. And so I can't tell you the number of times I've reached out to upperclassmen at Cornell who are lawyers now or in law school who are people of color who are killing the game. But there didn't seem to be a way to bring everyone together in one place. And so tapping into the resources we had on campus, the networks that we had, and also a lot of the companies that were continuously on campus, a lot of them law firms, just seemed like the perfect ingredients for an organization like Black Ivy. And that's why I think it was so successful, because our people, our members are so successful and they are so ambitious, and no better way than to bring everyone together.
And thank you guys so much for having that idea. I know it's impacted a lot of students so positively on campus, so thank you. So now we're going to talk about race and diversity and Blackness in the workplace. And I'm going to start with Asian Baron. And could the two of you describe some of the challenges regarding race and diversity that you have experienced at your job? And what does diversity look like in your respective workplaces?
Do you want me to start? I can. Okay, so to be honest, not that I never thought about it, because saying as a multiply marginalized person, I think about diversity and inclusion and my identity all the time, 24/7, wherever I am. But I didn't really acknowledge the fact that I guess some people feel uncomfortable in the workplace, because I had never felt uncomfortable in my own workplace, because all of my managers that I had ever had were women of color who made me feel super comfortable. And I worked in, obviously as Laura said, my role is both in HR and finance, but I sit on an HR floor. So HR is predominantly white women, just as, an industry. And, being around other women also makes me feel some sort of comfortable. Differences, between white and Black women are, palpable, but still I felt more comfortable than I would if it were predominantly white male space. And having 3 managers of color, 2 Black women, 1 Latino woman, I never thought about the people who don't have those things, because I had it and I had all the resources that I need. I felt comfortable. I could walk into a meeting. I could say, hey, that's racist. Hey, that's sexist. Hey, that's whatever, because I was made to feel comfortable in that situation. But now that I've returned full time, I'm on a predominantly white team. And I will say that there have been times where it's been more difficult. And again, because I was trained and I felt positioned in that spot when I had the women of color managers, I forgot that there's that level of uncomfortableness that can come with not having those people in your space. So I'll just talk about something that literally happened last week. Again, my team is affluent, they're all white, and sometimes I think they don't, and they're older, I would say, late 30s, early 40s. And sometimes they don't realize their privilege. And sometimes they'll say things that have an effect on me. For instance, they were complaining about wearing masks. And I'm like, well, Black and Latinx people are dying at an extremely high rate because of this virus. And they're the frontline workers. I think it's something like 70 to 80% of essential workers are people of color. Those are the people who are wearing masks for 12 hours a day. And you're complaining about ear pain that you have for 5 minutes because you're wearing a mask to protect yourself and other people, mainly minorities. I don't get that. So it's been rough, I think, in the transition, not having that space where I can go to my manager and be like, hey, Crystal, you'll never believe what they said. And, just have a little powwow, or a kiki, as they call it, just quickly in the office. I don't have that same thing anymore, especially because we're in the virtual environment. So to do that, I had to jump into someone's video conference room, which is, a different experience in and of itself. But I will say that Bloomberg does an amazing job, I think, of any company that I've personally seen in putting their money where their mouth is. This is not a plug. I'm not endorsing anything, as Laura said before, but Bloomberg does give the profits. I think it's 90 cents on every dollar is given back to philanthropy efforts. And recently, the racial justice movements and things like that, Mike Bloomberg, again, I don't endorse him as in any way, shape, or form. He's just the namesake and founder of the company. He recently partnered with My Brother's Keeper, which is should I say President Barack? Yes, President Barack Obama's foundation that's geared towards Black men. And Bloomberg funneled money, the company, into that organization, and they matched, I think, on every dollar that was given by Bloomberg employees back to those Black organizations. So they care about diversity and inclusion, but also I will say you have to take it with a grain of salt, because you look at the senior managers, you look at the team leaders, you look at middle management, and it's all white people. So it's just kind of that thing where it's like, yes, they care, but what are they doing about it? What actionable steps are they taking to recruit, retain, and promote? And promoting Black and, you know, minority talent is so difficult for some reason. And I think it's because they don't put resources towards it. And then they're like, whoa, why are people leaving? Why isn't this person being promoted? Why are there only white people? And it's like, look back in on yourself. You're not giving those same opportunities that you would give to white people, you know, the leadership and the promotions and things like that. And I've seen, especially in recruitment, so many wonderful candidates that are from minorities being passed up because they don't fit a mold. And again, that goes back to what I was saying about professionalism. What we think about as professionalism, we can't fit into that mold. We as Black people just inherently aren't thought of as professional, and that's the biggest problem. So I will say, yes, there are good efforts, but there's definitely more work that needs to be done.
Thank you, Asia. Yeah, no, for sure. I think, so for me, kind of, I'll take it in a couple parts. So at least individually and the dynamics with diversity and kind of the work environments that I've been in, I think I've been fortunate that I haven't experienced a lot of, I guess, what I would classify as like overt racism or a lot of microaggressions, to the point that it kind of escalated to the point where I would approach with my manager. And even, I guess, every manager that I've had has either been a white woman or a white man, but I felt very comfortable. They've, you know, sat me down. A lot of one-on-ones have sort of made themselves available for those conversations. But I think what's more important is sort of seeing, or how I've been approaching the dynamics across the entire firm. So at least for Ropes and Gray, they have a print center, at least in the New York office. So a lot of, basically all the legal teams will funnel their print requests down to the basement. And the team there is predominantly Black. When I look at the executive assistants, a lot of them are Black women, whereas you look at the associates and then the partners, it's predominantly white. At least for the New York office, the co-managing partner is a Black man, you know, very successfully, incredible leader. But it's interesting to see that what kind of roles, at least as of this point, that I sort of see where the diversity is funneled into. Like, I think in that case, I've been fortunate that at least on my team, it's very diverse. I feel very respected. I think even in that situation, there's still kind of roles that people are funneled into. I will say that I think one of the reasons that might be my experience is, one part of the reason I wanted to work at Ropes and Gray was that I searched for firms that at least had a decent, you know, diversity track record. I think it's like the Vault survey. You can see how other practitioners, law firms, you know, specialists will rank other firms. And while I wouldn't say that's definitive or amounts to a lot, I think it does count for something what other firms will, you know, acknowledge about firms and their diversity. But I was thinking, secondly, you know, I'm a light-skinned male in a pretty male-dominated position with, at least in my estimation, a decently white name where most of my communication is via email. So I certainly think there are some elements there where I may not get, you know, I guess if you look at the research with self-reported, you know, instances of microaggressions, I think that's certainly something that has played to my benefit and is worth acknowledging. But personally, I think, you know, I've been fortunate, but it is still an obstacle and something that I think, having had the experiences that I've had at Cornell and having to kind of reconcile with my diversity and my background, it's been something that's sort of been on the forefront of my mind and occupies kind of a lot of the interactions that I have, and sort of saying, how would that be different if I, you know, wasn't, you know, a mixed light-skinned man from Pennsylvania.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. And also, just for our audience, once again, feel free to submit any questions and we'll have time to answer them at the end. As you mentioned earlier, you work a lot with the intersectionality of race and disability. And I wanted to ask, how does your work advance diversity and inclusion initiatives and address systemic inequality, particularly at the intersection of race and disability?
Yeah, so my current job, we work with college students and recent graduates that have disabilities, and we work with predominantly people of color at that same intersection as well. And we source our students from a lot of college campuses, as well as student disability offices, and then clubs on campuses. And one of the ways that we work towards in increasing the wage gap or decreasing the wage gap is through helping students find internship and full-time opportunities with Fortune 500 companies that we partner with. So we work with companies to, on one end, help them with their talent strategy to help them recognize that there are people of color with disabilities ready to work in their talent pipelines. At the same time, we also work with the students to make sure they're ready for employment, whether it's their first internship or their third internship, or whether it's their first full-time job that they're looking for. And one of the ways that we do that is through mentorship. I think, as Lydia mentioned earlier, that a lot of times it's hard to be able to envision what you want to be if you don't have those mentors and people that you can see doing that work in front of you. And so we partner them with people with disabilities that are currently in the workplace at some of our companies that we're partnered with. And then we help them through a 6-month program be able to find ways to improve their career development, whether that's through their LinkedIn profile, resume workshops, different career topics. And then also work with the company to be able to have an open jobs and open roles for our students with disabilities. So being able to make sure that they are providing an interpreter if an interpreter is needed during an interview, or making sure they have captioning if their interview is happening digitally. And some of these accommodations are things that are naturally available, especially in this virtual world that we're living in this pandemic, making sure that it's available year-round for our students with disabilities. And so we work at the intersection of multiple disabilities, so not just one kind of disability, but physical, mental, and visual, any kind of impairment that a person might have. But we work both on the company side to help them make sure they have an inclusive process for their recruiting process, and then work with their students to make sure they're ready for the workforce.
Great, thank you so much. And for Sammy and Lydia, both of you are on your way onto your first year of law school, and congratulations. And I wanted to ask about those 2 years of working right after undergrad, and how did those 2 years prepare you for law school? And can you tell us about your experience in regards to Blackness in the workplace as well? Lydia, would you like to start?
Yeah, so I worked for everyone. Sorry, I missed the introductions, but I worked at Goldman Sachs for 2 years in compliance for a consumer bank, particularly in a regulatory project management role. So I worked on a global program that ensured that we were compliant with a particular regulation, in addition to a bunch of federal exams. So whenever, say, the SEC is like, you have 2 months to give us this data, my team was the one compiling it for the consumer bank. And so it's a big debate in a lot of pre-law communities whether to take a gap year or to go straight. And I initially was trying to go straight, but to a graduate program in London, opposed to going into the workplace, because I had a lot of undergraduate internships. And I could not say strongly enough, despite all my internships, I am so happy I worked. And even, it's not so much the subject matter as much as it is knowing how to adult, figuring out what areas of the corporate sector you like and you don't like. So I learned I like project management opposed to what I call hotline work, which is a repetitive function you're doing all the time. I learned how to persevere. I learned what it was like to work at a company that was honestly very stressful, had a lot of deadlines. And I think that's very transferable, quite frankly, to big law, because the first 2 years are a lot of stress. And so Goldman in particular, for me, my team was very diverse. And I actually found Goldman in general to be very diverse. And I'm starting to learn that a lot of top companies actually have the luxury of being diverse, because so many people want to work there. They can cherry pick from all the schools they want and get top talent. So particularly on the federation side, opposed to revenue streaming side, you tend to actually see higher numbers of Black and brown people and women. My MD, my managing director, was a Black woman. My manager was an Asian woman. I had 4 out of 10, so out of 10 people on my team, 6 were women, half were attorneys. So in my particular case, I was not adjusting to the diverse environment as much as I was adjusting to the quality and demands of my job, which is a blessing, because we all know that particularly the legal profession is not very diverse. So now I'm working at a law firm. I'm at Paul Weiss as an SEO fellow. And although the firm has a history and a track record of really championing diversity issues, they were the firm that worked on Brown versus Board of Education. They take on a lot of pro bono work, et cetera. They have like less than 10% of the firm is diverse, which is actually not uncommon for law firms. And so I would say overall, I highly recommend for me take a gap before going to law school if you're not sure what you want to do, if you need to grow up professionally before going to law school. And even if you decide what you did over your 2 years is not what you want to practice as a lawyer, or is not being relevant, you'd be surprised how just learning how to perform in an office setting will benefit you. Because I would just feel so uncomfortable going into a workplace, not knowing how to use Excel, not knowing how to file emails, not knowing how to work to 2 a.m., et cetera. Like those are just skill sets that serve you no matter what you do. And so that was my personal experience, but I'm sure Sammy may have additional experiences or things that might be very different.
Yeah, definitely. And apologies in advance if you hear barking. My dog decided to come into the room and he's starting to freak out a little bit, and I don't want to get up and make him leave. So come here. Yeah, so I 100% echo everything that Lydia said, and a couple things I want to add to that, and also just talk about my broader experience working, is one, setting up yourself financially, especially now. I'm moving to Cambridge, although classes will be online, and I'm spending thousands of dollars on furnishing an apartment, and I know that I did not have that money to do that immediately following graduation from college, so I'm going to be able to set myself up and be comfortable in a new home and not have debt coming into law school, because I already know I'm going to be taking out a lot in loan debt. So being able to make sure that my finances outside of my loans are stable is really important, and something that I didn't fully appreciate when I was a senior in college. So definitely consider that as well. I knew that I wanted to take some time off before going to law school, basically by like the beginning of my junior year, because I knew, for one, I am not the best standardized test taker, and although I hadn't taken the LSAT yet, I just wanted to give myself that sort of cushion. And typically people say that the more time that you spend, or the more time that you sort of are detached from graduating from college and having some work experience, oftentimes the less they weigh your LSAT score as opposed to your work experience. So that was really important to me. I also felt like, again, with professional degrees, it's good to have some sort of context and background to deliver thoughtful ideas and discussion in the classroom. So I also wanted that experience, having some time off. And then also just having a break. I worked really hard at Cornell, like founding Black Ivy, while maintaining a good GPA is not easy to do. And I wanted that time to sort of have a different environment and work style. And I feel so much better going into law school. And even I saw someone had a question about the SEO law internship program. I feel so much better and well prepared in my internship program now because I've had work experience. And even though, yes, I had a legal and compliance role, so it was kind of related, I think really any role gives you the ability to have the basic understanding of what is a good work product, how to ask the right questions to understand what product the requester wants from you, and then how to prepare yourself and bucket your time in order to complete that product efficiently. Those are basic skills that any role can give you, and I've been able to successfully do that and even receive feedback about my professionalism and my ability to manage up because of things that I learned while I was working before going to law school. As for my time, in addition to, of course, getting used to my job, I took the LSAT my senior year of college. So then I spent my sort of summer into fall of 2019 working on my law school application materials. And it can be definitely difficult your senior year navigating the job hunt and being forthcoming about your interest in going to law school. And I'll definitely say, like, I do think that I lost some job opportunities because I was honest about my intentions about going to law school. But I think the role that I had at 6th Street was absolutely amazing. Like, they had this understanding going in that I was a 2-year commitment. I was willing to really work hard and dig in for those 2 years. So that made the discussions much easier come fall, when I needed to have additional time to study, or not study, but write my law school personal statements and other application materials, because I really think you should be spending almost as much time writing and tailoring those statements as you are studying for the LSAT. As for being a diverse woman in the workplace, so when I started at 6th Street, I was the only Black woman professional, like, at the whole entire firm. It is a smaller firm, so I think when I started there was about 200 professionals, and then when I left, I think there was about 260. And Barron can correct me because he's on secondment at my firm now, which is absolutely amazing, and crazy how small the world is. So yeah, I was only Black professional for about 3 months, and then they hired a woman who actually graduated from HBS on the investment side. Because I grew up in Maine in a rural town and went to Cornell, I'm used to navigating white spaces, but that's definitely something that I was aware of my first few weeks at the firm, because honestly, Cornell was the most diverse place I'd ever lived in my whole entire life, which some will say is very sad, because other people had the opposite experience. That it was the least diverse place they've ever been. So it was a code switch for me to go from Cornell and having all my, different friends that looked differently and had different backgrounds, and then going to a place that was very homogenous. And I mean, honestly, this quarantine period has been a great time for me to explore my natural hair. Barron can know, I've always worn protective styles at work, and I always tried to make them a certain length because I was nervous about people asking me, like, oh, what did you do to your hair today? Like, did you braid your hair this morning? Can I touch your hair? I was super nervous about those conversations, and so I just preferred to not have my hair out and be natural, which is really unfortunate that I felt that much discomfort with sort of myself and how I present myself at the firm. And definitely looking back, and something I'm going to try to be more cognizant of going forward, is I shouldn't try to put so much pressure on how I look and how others perceive me because of how I look. I think, everyone at our firm is very, very nice. Or the firm I worked at was very, very nice. And we're open to having those conversations and those discussions. So I might have put more pressure on myself than what was warranted. But I'm still navigating and I'm still learning through that.
Great. Thank you so much, both of you. That was amazing. So I have a question that any of the panelists can answer if they would like. So how has each of your respective workplaces responded to the recent resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement and the death of George Floyd, among other Black Americans? And what initiatives have your institutions done in order to empower minority voices and have real tangible change, instead of just sending out emails about D&I, but what are they actually doing to push those initiatives?
I can start with that one. And I can speak to the SEO law firm I'm at right now, Wachtell. So Wachtell, similar to Paul Weiss, is not diverse at all. There's only one Black partner. He's a male. And there is only 2 women attorneys, and they're both associates. And so even less diverse than I even expected. And honestly, the first week I started was the weekend, or the Monday after George Floyd was murdered. And it was a really difficult time. And I struggled sort of being fully present and excited and there at the firm, while also having so much that I'm feeling in the background. And that first day, one of the founders of the firm did send an email to everyone that essentially said, we don't believe in this. We think that this is abhorrent, and we are going to continue to invest and devote our time and resources to the organizations that we continue to support, like SEO and Prep for those who are familiar. And I was a bit disappointed by that, because I would have wanted to see a response that was in direct retaliation to what happened to George Floyd and the protests that had arisen after. And I think, you know, we do have to give these corporations some grace, because especially for a place like Wachtell, where it's not very diverse, like they don't immediately know what is the best way to respond, but they are open to the discussion. So the task force of about 10 to 15 Black attorneys at the firm created a memo that they sent to the executive leadership team at Wachtell, essentially asking for more demands and more response. And so by that Friday, they had developed a matching program where they're going to match all donations placed by anyone at Wachtell. We have several racial and police brutality discussions over the summer. And then the recruiting team also released this initiative where they will pay for a book out of a set of 5 that discuss being like white fragility, being Black in the workplace, the Jim Crow and the criminal system, and for potential book discussions following reading those books. So those are like a few initiatives that they've started. I think that it's great that they're open to the discussion, and I think all firms should show and say that they're open to the discussion, and know that the response might not be immediate, because everyone is trying to figure out how to respond and what are the right next steps.
I can go next. So for Sixth Street Partners, within, I believe, a day or maybe it was 2 days, the partner team had put out a statement about the shooting and the anti-Black violence and the situation with George Floyd, and more broadly. Additionally, they came out and said they were going to give or start a multi-million-dollar gift to the ACLU, and they matched up to $3,000, I think, for anyone in the firm to donate to various causes. So I think the statement came out on Saturday. That Monday at the platform-wide call, they reiterated, all the statements in that memo to the whole firm. And then they set up so that Friday, or on Juneteenth, they had Ibram Kendi come and give a discussion about how to be an anti-racist. They sourced copies of his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, from a Black bookstore and sent that to everyone in the firm. And then they increased their partnership with, for diversity recruiting, they, I think, created a new partnership with Jobwell and sort of reiterated their commitments to that in the firm. It was weird, I think, reading the statement. I guess I didn't even know emotionally what I needed at that time. But at least having the statement, I think, so soon thereafter meant a lot to me. I think maybe, unfortunately, because I wasn't expecting something so soon, and I think so staunchly opposed to it. I think just from past experience and how long it takes. But generally, I thought they were very open to discussion. The CEO at the time came on at the Monday call and sort of reiterated that everyone is going to process this at their own times, and to be aware of that, across the entire platform, over those next weeks. I just don't know how my law firm responded, though.
Oh, go ahead.
No, sorry, that was it.
Okay. Thanks, Baron. I can share a little bit about what my organization did. So we are a nonprofit that works with Fortune 500 companies. So we work with other minority-owned businesses to put pressure on companies to be able to change their policies. And so kind of working from the outside in. What we have done in one example is we put on a conference for about 3,000 attendees from Fortune 500 companies that's going on currently. And I helped put together with our staff a panel on Blackness and disability and the intersection of race and disability.
to be able to have the conversations, because many of the people who've been subject to police brutality have had disabilities, whether they've been very present or very invisible. And so it's a conversation that the disability community, which is often very white, hasn't been having and hasn't really been inclusive of. And so today, actually, we went live with our conversation and had Black panelists talk about it from the intersection of Black panelists who were formerly veterans. We had those who are also queer and Black and disabled, and just having the intersection of all these conversations to be able to voice that we are here, we are not okay with what's going on, and we're wanting changes to happen both in the corporate world but also in the community as well. And so I was really proud of our organization because we're pretty small, but to be able to have that conversation on a large scale and then be able to work with companies that are reaching out to us asking how they can be more inclusive and working on them on a case-by-case basis to help strengthen their policies for being inclusive, for reaching out to diverse organizations for their pipelines, for recruiting, was something that I was proud that our organization is able to work on in conjunction with other minority-owned businesses.
Asia, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the management committee of Bloomberg, which is, the founder, the director of the board, etc., they put out an email, but it came directly from Mike, and I can't remember if George Floyd happened before or after Juneteenth, but I remember it all happening sort of at the same time. Honestly, all this time has kind of been a blur for me, so I don't remember exactly what happened first, second, etc. But there was a communication which I was very shocked by the depth of, because it moved me and I was expecting something very sterile, nothing personal, etc. But in the email, there was detailed history about, police brutality, about Juneteenth, about just the Black Lives Matter movement, and making that in relation to the murders of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd, which I thought was beautifully written. I'm sure that I can share that with you all. It was just I don't know. I feel like Mike didn't write it. But it was one of those things that, I don't know, was so authentic that I was shocked, and I read it again and again and again and just kept being shocked at it because it was good, actually, because I feel like when, companies send out things, they're like, yes, we're doing all these things and yada, 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 but it's not emotional, it's more clinical. And this was one of those things that I think appealed to people's emotions and hearts. And then immediately after, there was a talk hosted by the head of diversity and inclusion for the organization, and she talked about her experience. She's English, and she's Black, and she was talking about her sons and, teaching them, how you're supposed to go out and present yourself and, to do XYZ when you're with the cops, et cetera, et cetera. And coincidentally, there was a task force already being built before all of these events happened for recruitment, in terms of us creating a diversity and sourcing team, which is made up of basically only underrepresented minorities, so there are white people, but they identify in a marginalized identity in other aspects. And again, like I said before, there was a lot of donations that were happening and things were being matched, and there's more of a commitment to development, which I was talking about before. And even in these past couple of weeks, I've seen a real change. I'm not sure how long that's going to last and how much, energy is going to be continually put towards those things, but I can say that I felt more comfortable in the workplace, especially because in our D&I, it's department, it's separated by the client partners, business partners, and then HR business partners. And the client partners, had workshops with the clients, and we're like, okay, so we're going to tell you why All Lives Matter is wrong. And if you say it, you're kind of excommunicated. And then they did the same thing with TLs and senior managers and things like that, and sort of also gave them the tools to talk about those things with their teams. And of course, that's on the managers themselves to implement those type of things, but we have those people within the diversity and inclusion department kind of holding those people accountable. So I will say that there's been a change, and I don't feel as uncomfortable as I did before. And it's good to know that there's kind of that level of unacceptableness that comes with, saying things that are out of place, and just knowing that it's coming from the senior level and saying, that's not okay, we're not doing that anymore, has felt really nice.
Great. Thank you all for sharing. If nobody else has anything to say about that, we're going to move on to our audience question and answer portion. So if any audience members have questions, feel free to submit below. And the first question we have for our panelists is, how can we increase recruitment of diverse candidates to pre-professional organizations at Cornell? So anyone can jump in if they would like.
Can I just quickly say that a person in and of themselves cannot be diverse? It's a very dehumanizing word and a dehumanizing term. Diversity in and of itself is applicable to groups. So when we think about using that word diverse, it's number one, wrong, like definitionally, morally, ethically, etc. We should use more words that describe what we're talking about, as in underrepresented minorities, underrepresented candidates, etc. That's what I'll say first.
Thank you for that clarification. Very important.
I'll jump in. So as someone who has often been on the side of an organization trying to bring in more like underrepresented talent, for Cornell as a whole, because I worked for 4 years in undergraduate admissions in the multicultural recruitment office, but B, in actual organizations at Cornell, we have two problems. First, there's a lot going on at Cornell. So like, even if you don't want to be involved in diverse organizations in general, you have plenty of options and they do a pretty poor job of marketing them. And then on top of that, you kind of have communities that almost like silo themselves. So you kind of see the same 100 or so Black and brown faces at most Cornell events. So I found it harder to reach people that did not fall into communities that we typically reach. So I would say like your LaFemmes or BWSN, you have BSU, like you're gonna see the same people. So I found that when I was trying to reach people that were not in that community is when I would actually personally invite people. And like, maybe there's a person in my class who I talked to a few times a week. She said she had an interest in going to law school one day. She happens to be a Black person. I'm going to ask her to personally come to a Black Ivy event and ask her to sit next to me. Like when you actually sometimes put a personal invitation next to whatever initiative you're doing, sometimes you have better results, in my opinion. Also working more strategically with professors and leadership of schools, I found sometimes they like share emails about events I've seen higher turnout, because I think your email gets so clogged. Like I've seen some amazing opportunities come through my inbox, but just because there's just so many of them and it could just, and sometimes not very descriptive, just a bunch of flyers, you don't really feel any personal draw to come through. More so when a professor maybe shares in the middle of a class, like XYZ organization is particularly hosting this for whatever purpose, sometimes you feel additional draw to come. But Cornell is a blessing and a curse in that you have so many opportunities. I actually was pleasantly surprised with the number of opportunities you have for being underrepresented. But I think the mediums in which you get that information and also your own personal goals for yourself can lead to whether or not you decide to opt in. And so it's not perfect, but I do think personal invitations and continued outreach goes far. That's just my first answer.
I just quickly wanted to say that the reason why I decided to join Kappa is because I saw Barron as the president of the organization. That's candid, and me, the only reason why I felt comfortable even in that space, I showed up to the first information session like in casual clothing while everyone else was wearing suits and all these things, and I felt out of place. And then Barron came on stage and I remember being like, I'm in the right place. I would have to say that having visible people, not just in your organization, but on the e-board, because Cornell struggles with this a lot. Look at any business fraternities e-board, look at any pre-professional fraternities e-board, you're going to see mainly white people, mainly men. And that was something that deterred me from wanting to apply to other organizations, because I didn't see people like me in positions of power. It's not enough to have just people in your G body. It's more than that, because if you're not thinking about those voices that aren't represented, and to be honest, I've just found that a lot of people at Cornell have a hard time thinking about people other than themselves. So for you not to be physically in the room and putting pressure on those people, it's toxic. And like I said, again, the literal only reason why I decided to go through and proceed for rushing with Kappa was because I saw Barron and I had a meaningful conversation with him, and we connected, and having somebody or seeing somebody in power inspired me to want to, you know, continue on and go through the process and then one day hope to be on the e-board. So I'd say it's really important not just to have people in your organization, it's important to promote them to positions of power. And I know that it's hard because e-board, like, voting is normally a popularity contest and you know who those people are. So it's just like, but you have to really make an effort to make sure that you're having those people in meaningful positions who can actually do things for you, and not just like Black women in the D&I chair or Black people doing, you know, all that sort of heavy lifting emotional work. It has to be a Black person as president, a Black person as the VP of finance, a Latino person as, you know, XYZ, a disabled person as, you know, another thing. It's not just about being in the space, it's about having the power as well.
Very well said. Thank you so much. So we have another question, and someone asked, can panelists speak to what they each looked for in employers in terms of diversity and inclusion when they were recruiting, and what initiatives have you found beneficial from your employers?
I can start. So one of the things that I looked for in a company when I was first graduating from Cornell was, do they have an employee resource group or business resource group for people of color, for just different diversity groups? Through the courses I had taken at Cornell, mainly in the disability department, I had heard about these groups and that they kind of served as a way to provide affinity groups a way to find community, but also that they provided resources and actual like ways for you to get opportunities for promotion through being able to hear about opportunities through different parts of the company. And so I would ask in interviews, you know, do you have an employee resource group? Is that funded through your company? Do you have senior members of your leadership on the boards of these employee resource groups? And how are they viewed and valued in the company? Because it's really important that they not just have these groups, but they actually are providing value to the company by the company seeking their opinions, whether it's through products or whether it's through feedback or whether it's just having senior members of leadership required to be on the board and required to be involved in them. And since then, I have learned so much more about like the way companies have done different strategies with working on their employee resource groups. Sometimes those groups can help with recruiting efforts in the community, community service projects, just different things that actually have an outside effect on the company. And so if you can search for that and find that out about the company, usually they'll have it on their website or their diversity page, but if not, ask about that in the interview process.
Something I'd like to add real quick to that is because my firm is smaller, there weren't a lot of initiatives that are already in place. And if you do find yourself in an organization like that, and it is an organization that is open to doing more, you can create it yourself. So I planned the company's first ever diversity recruiting trip, and I went back to Cornell, honestly too, because I wanted to visit Cornell Law School. And the fall of 2019, we released like a recruiting process to find someone to fill in my role after I graduated. And then we also had meetings with SWAG and the Black Ivy Pre-Law Society just to talk about what Sixth Street is, because I had no idea about the alternative investment space and how to find a job at a firm like that, especially for those in the investment role, because they look for people who've had a few years of investment banking experience. And then also going back to the previous question, I also wanted to add, I think it's really important and it's great when organizations that are predominantly white partner and co-sponsor events with like Black Ivy Pre-Law Society, LAFM, SWAG. That's a great way for people of color to have like a direct touch point with someone in an organization. I know for me, and as Asia kind of alluded to, I felt more comfortable applying for organization if I saw people that looked like me or if I closely knew someone that was involved in that organization. And I think it's also gonna be a great benefit this coming semester with like some classes being online, like the ability to have randomized breakout rooms in Zoom to sort of be disruptive and not hanging out with the same people you typically hang out with in class. Because by sophomore year, I was huddling with the same people that I always knew, who were oftentimes other people of color that I could relate to before and after class. And I'm not going to learn about other events or other organizations and want to feel compelled to join them because I'm kind of staying in a smaller knit community. So with breakout rooms and randomized discussion groups, I think people will have the opportunity to talk to others outside of the like lecture hall setting, and from there develop natural connections, and that could possibly help them with learning about other organizations that they might be interested in but previously felt uncomfortable applying to.
Great, thank you so much. So we have one final audience question. If someone would like to answer this briefly, what tips do you all have for starting discussions in regards to race and diversity and advocating for yourself as a young professional of color?
I can start. I just joined Bloomberg. I did 4 internships previously, so I just joined full time June 22nd, which is maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I say, just say it. And I know that there might be repercussions, but honestly, if there's any, reprimanding happening or, anything like that, obviously there's a case to be made, and not saying that you have the mental, physical, emotional, etc. energy to go through all of that. But I think there's something to be said about people when you catch them off guard and kind of tell them that you're uncomfortable with something, or if you tell them that they need to be doing something better. Because my team last week kept using the word diverse, throwing it around, calling people this, calling people that, and it sounded like they were talking about animals or literally anything other than human beings, like living people with identities. And as soon as I heard that and we had the call, of course that wasn't the right place or time because there was someone else on the call, I sent an email out to everyone on my team and I said, this is why you can't say that. Here's my personal experience. I'm uncomfortable. And then I linked an article that also helped them understand what I was saying. And my heart was pounding. When I tell you, after I sent that email, I was like, I'm getting fired. And you know what? That's fine. I just can't hear people. I can't hear people talk about other people like animals. That's not okay. I get an email back from my manager and she was like, I'm so sorry. You were so right. And she took action immediately. And that would have never happened if I didn't say anything. And when I tell you that I was so shocked with what's happening, I had another meeting with her today, and she was telling me that she literally went to D&I. She talked to the people who were all responsible for, D&I recruiting and talking about diverse people. And she was telling me that there's actual change that's being implemented now. I saw the PowerPoint deck that's being shown on literally the new words that they're giving to people and the language that they're changing. So if you're trying to start this conversation, I say just do it. And you kind of, I'm a risk taker, so it's like if you're not, maybe speak to someone else, maybe a coworker or someone who's a little bit above you before you say something. But I think there's something to be said for just being bold, because it matters, and what you say matters, and how people respond to you and whether or not they take action, that really matters too.
Really quickly, in a similar vein to just do it, I would say actually share your story as much as you're comfortable doing so. But I was surprised how many senior people actually wanted to hear from me. So I'm a big advocate for pipeline programs and the role they played in my life and people like me. And so I actually went to a number of very senior people at companies I worked at and said, you need to increase your funding for XYZ program. They're like, done. I was like, wait, what? Like, I gave a case for why it mattered and the role it played in my life. And I think my background was enough ethos to kind of show that these programs matter and my experiences matter. And especially now, because people are looking for things to do, this is a good time to kind of be bold in your suggestions. And again, they may not always implement them, but maybe they will. And I found it to be particularly helpful to kind of use your voice as a proponent of change in times like this, because sometimes when you don't know, and people, when they don't know, they make assumptions. And I have found it to be pretty helpful to kind of dispel some myths and rumors, even if they're positive or negative, about my own experience and people like me during this time.
Well, if anyone does not have anything else to add, I would just like to give everyone a huge thank you to all our panelists. Thank you so much. You are all so amazing. And thank you for everyone who joined our webinar in the audience. We really appreciate it. And we hope you all have an amazing night. And this was recorded and we'll send it out to everyone who was registered. So thank you all for coming.